the use of this new IRBM missile. And with each passing day, the Ukraine-Russia conflict seems to be escalating. Now the Houthis are involved. You've got the Taliban fighters, North Korean soldiers also there present, United States and UK sponsored missiles with the Ukraine. This is escalating by the day. In Kazakhstan, Vladimir Putin's fresh threat, how are you looking at it?
Thank you, Kabir. At the very outset, I think the time that they have now is very limited. Trump has already nominated Lieutenant General Kellogg to ensure that this complete special operations, call it the Ukraine-Russian war, come to an end by before or just about by the time he takes command as the President of the United States of America. Meanwhile, Biden has a short time of about approximately 2 months to ensure that the Russians are on the back foot and the ceasefire, that the most important area is 1,000 square kilometers of the Kursk region, which the Ukrainians would want to solidify so that the bargaining chip increases. At the same time, the Russians are wanting to ensure that before they go in for or Trump takes over, they can get this 1,000 square kilometers of an area in Kursk vacated, for which the Americans have permitted the use of the ATAMS, that the Army Tactical Missile System, range about 300 kilometers, supersonic speed of the sound. Those kind of missiles to be permitted to be hit in the Russian territory. Now, since Kursk is a Russian territory, where they are going to hit, the Russians are finding it extremely difficult to retake that 1,000 square kilometers, for which the Russians have amassed about 50,000 troops, of which, as you rightly said, there are about 10,000 Koreans, North Koreans, and things of those kinds. I don't know where all the fighters are also coming, but that itself indicates that the Russians are definitely in need of boots on ground. The Ukrainians are totally finished. They have virtually very little boots on ground, and they're therefore dependent on the air defense system being supplied to the West. They're very much dependent on whatever the Americans would be giving them. The Germans have agreed to give them 4,000 missiles, far more superior than the Kamikaze missiles that they're already using. In all this context, you find that the Ukrainians are wanting more, and that air defense system of theirs would fail. Now, with the hypersonic thing having entered, which means almost 5 times the speed of sound, and the present Oreshnik going up to 11 Mach, that means 11 times the speed of sound, can't be detected, can't be intercepted, and can hit targets and has a multiple re-entry vehicle. So that kind of MIRV allowed to be entering, and they've just hit what right now? Dnipro. They haven't yet struck Kyiv, even though they're saying decision centers will be hit. But the power centers have been hit, energy centers have been hit, defense manufacturing things have been hit. So Ukrainians are on the back foot fully well. Zelensky knows that once Trump comes to power, very little support will be coming from America. Biden knows that this kind of a thing happens. So all that they can do is give and reinforce, give as much of armament they can to the Ukrainians to be able to put Russians in the back foot. So now the Russians have decided that it's going to be now or never. In that context, with what's happened now in West Asia, Hezbollah in for ceasefire, Hamas, almost wanting a ceasefire. So things over there reasonably seem to be under control. Now, they don't want Americans to be focusing only on Ukraine. And in that context, I think the Russian counteroffensive, and very hard before the winter sets in, because winter, as it is the energy infrastructure, power, all of it cut. Millions of people over there are going to be suffering. You've seen what's happening in South Korea, the kind of winter that is going to be coming in. So this entire area is going to be hit very, very badly. Austria wants gas. Europe wants gas. All that gas will not be able to reach there. Germans are suffering. Germans are to the Russian. So there's a whole lot of things happening, and Russian with hypersonic missiles coming in to the play, as they said, intermediate range ballistic missiles, in the range up to 5,500 kilometers. If intercontinental ballistic missiles, it will go beyond 5,500. Or a short range, less than 1,000 kilometer range. So these kind of missiles being used by Russia on Ukraine is indicative that Russia wants to finish off the war at the earliest, and probably Kyiv, where people are, and the decision-making centers are, if they are being hit very badly, that will be the end of Ukraine and probable surrender or yeah.
All right. General, many thanks for your initial comments. Of course, both sides have claimed, Hezbollah and Israel, a violation of the ceasefire. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But you rightly pointed out, General Kellogg, he's been tapped in as the Ukrainian envoy. And of course, United States' President Joe Biden, he's vouched for more support for Ukraine. Pramit, do come in here. Even as we're going to talk about all these aspects with Donald Trump making his way to the Oval Office, let's talk a little bit about the morale of the citizens as well. every day you've got to go inside these bunkers, these underground metro stations, not just the energy grid, but like localities in civilian residential areas are being targeted as well. And like General pointed out, seems like Zelensky is on the back foot in terms of the morale of the entire war, where Ukraine is placed with these. Every new day, there's a new threat coming at the hands of Putin. How are you looking at these developments? Your opening comments.
So yes, we have, I think as a general correctly said, a lot of this is now about positioning, if you wish, in preparation for the arrival of the Trump administration. Both sides believe that Trump will push very hard for a negotiated settlement. But you'll notice that Kellogg and others have said that does not mean America will cut off aid to the Ukraine immediately, but they will, I think, push for that the aid should be tied to a peace process in which Russia is at the table. At present, we have peace conferences organized by the West, but Russia is not at the table. A thing that India has publicly said is a mistake. Um, Biden, in attempt, if you wish, to ensure that Trump does not have too much leeway in terms of cutting down weapon systems or provision of aid to Ukraine, has effectively allowed things like the ATACMS missiles and so on to be used. He's lifted many of the restrictions on Ukraine in terms of the usage of Western weapons. So the idea is to actually box Trump in when he comes in January. And needless to say, you've seen Putin respond. The missiles do not fundamentally have much impact on the front, the battlefront. They're too few in number, and so far both sides have been reasonably restrained about what they hit. Russia regularly has hit the energy systems and the power electricity grid of the Ukraine, and the Ukraine has rebuilt it or buried quite a bit of it over time. But it is fundamentally about the signaling in preparation for the Trump administration's arrival, and a warning to both sides how far they can go, are prepared to go on this issue. But I think what is important to keep in mind but what is starting to clear is that, as you've mentioned, Ukrainians, probably the first time now, we're starting to see polls indicating that a plurality of Ukrainians, at least, are supporting the idea of a negotiated settlement. Until now, we've had figures of 70–80% of Ukrainians saying we are prepared to continue to fight. But the depletion in terms of ranks, some Ukrainian units are now fighting with 10–20% of their supposed manpower units. The Kursk the offensive, which had gone reasonably well for the Ukrainians in the beginning, is now they're losing. They've lost almost all, I think about 50–60% of the land that they had gained in the last offensive has been reclaimed by Russia, and more offensives are going to come. Russia simply has more manpower. It's not great either. Some Russian units are down to 30 or 40%. But the infusion of North Korean troops, Yemeni mercenaries, and so on, gives at least the sense that Russia has the capacity to keep putting out more than Ukraine can. So
And
all of these are starting to come together, and what we're
right.
going to be seeing is probably an increase in violence and an escalation as they move towards peace negotiations. And this is not uncommon. When India and Pakistan, as we would head towards a ceasefire, it was often not uncommon to see both our soldiers on both sides try to grab as much land as possible and see violence intensify before the ceasefire would be brought in.